didn't happen all at once. No big argument. No final straw. Just a slow dimming, like a porch light left on during the day. Still burning, but hardly noticeable anymore. I was about 63 when I first felt it. Sat across from my oldest friend in a coffee shop we'd been going to since our 40s. Same booth, same corner by the window. He was telling me a story I'd probably heard twice already that month, about some neighbor who left their trash bins out too long. And I remember stirring my tea, staring at the way the light hit the rim of the cup, and thinking, I don't feel at home here. That thought scared me. We'd raised our kids in tandem. Our wives had shared recipes. We'd watched each other's parents fade into memory. That kind of friendship, it felt sacred once. It was sacred. But there I was, listening to the hum of his voice without really hearing it, realizing that the space between us had grown too wide for even memory to bridge. Looking back now, at 80, I know it wasn't about him. Not entirely. It was about me too. See, after 60, something quiet shifts inside you. You stop needing noise. You start noticing how certain interactions drain you more than they nourish you. I found myself choosing stillness over chatter, long walks over long phone calls. I didn't want to gossip. I didn't want to rehash old arguments from 20 years ago. I wanted to talk about what it felt like to watch your hands tremble in the morning, or how strange it is that the world moves so fast now, you can't quite catch your breath. But not everyone wants to go there with you. Some stay where the light is bright and loud, where conversations are sharp and quick, and silence is something to be avoided. And that's fine. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't laugh at the same jokes or smile through stories I didn't recognize myself in. I remember one dinner, a small get-together with 3 couples we used to travel with. The kind where someone brings that same potato salad, and someone else tells the same cruise story. I sat there chewing slowly, watching the room, and feeling like a guest in my own life. I wasn't angry, just out of place, like I'd shown up wearing the wrong decade. That was one of the first times I understood something was truly different. I didn't need to be entertained anymore. I needed to be understood. There's a kind of exhaustion that settles in your bones when you force old dynamics to keep living, even after they've quietly passed on. It's like dragging a suitcase with a broken wheel. It might still roll, but not without effort. And eventually, you stop asking if it's worth it. At that age, you begin to protect your peace like it's the last candle in a cold room. I wasn't looking for perfect people, just present ones. The kind who don't talk over you, who ask real questions and wait for the answers. Who aren't trying to keep you boxed into who you used to be just because it's easier for them. You see, that's another thing I didn't expect, how many people hold on to the version of you they're comfortable with. And when you begin to change, grow softer in some places, firmer in others, they don't always follow. I had one friend, we met in our 20s, bonded over late-night poker games and cheap whiskey. By the time we were in our 60s, I traded poker for prayer and whiskey for warm chamomile. But every time we met, he still treated me like that reckless kid who once got thrown out of a bar for singing too loud. I try to talk about grief or aging or how quiet the nights felt lately, and he'd laugh, slap my shoulder and say, "Come on, you're getting sentimental in your old age." Maybe I was. But what he didn't understand is that being sentimental wasn't a weakness. It was survival. It was the way I made sense of the world slowing down around me. Sometimes, when someone doesn't see who you are now, it's more painful than if they'd never known you at all, because you realize they're not ignoring a stranger, they're ignoring your evolution. And that's when you start to pull back, gently, quietly, not because you're angry, but because you finally learned that your time, your spirit, your energy, they're not infinite, and they deserve to be spent where they're respected. Some people grow roots, others stay in the same shallow soil, reaching only for what's familiar. I stopped apologizing for wanting deeper conversations. I stopped shrinking to fit into the memories people had of me. It was lonely at first. I won't pretend it wasn't. But over time, it also felt like peace. I used to think that history was enough to hold people together. That the years, the birthdays remembered, the holidays spent side by side, the emergencies answered with a late-night knock, would act like a glue that kept friendships from slipping apart. But time, as it turns out, isn't glue. It's weather. It either softens the bond or wears it down. And sometimes it's both. There's an ache that comes when someone you once shared everything with no longer understands the language your heart now speaks. I had a friend, I'll call her Margaret, who used to be the first one I'd call when something wonderful or terrible happened. She'd been there through the chaos of raising children, through my wife's illness, through the quiet terror of retirement when I realized I had no idea who I was without a schedule. But one day, I called her after a dream I couldn't shake. A dream about walking through an empty house, opening doors to rooms that led to more doors, but never to anything I recognized. I told her I thought it might mean something, maybe grief, maybe fear. She chuckled, said I was getting too philosophical, and changed the subject to her new patio furniture. I remember staring at the phone long after the call ended, realizing I hadn't felt heard at all. And it wasn't the first time. She hadn't changed maliciously. She just stopped meeting me where I was. At this age, your soul craves something different. Not noise, not distraction, meaning. But not everyone can go there with you. Some stay tangled in surface talk, their comfort zone. That's fine. I just couldn't live there anymore. And so, slowly, I began retreating from those conversations that left me feeling smaller than when they began. That's how it starts, really. The beginning of the letting go. You don't slam the door. You just stop knocking so often. And in that quiet space, you start asking different questions. Does this friendship leave me feeling seen? Or just remembered? Am I heard? Or simply tolerated? Is this a connection? Or a habit? They're uncomfortable questions. They don't always lead to easy answers, but they lead to truth. And that truth can be lonely, but it can also be liberating. I began to notice who asked me about my days, not out of politeness, but out of presence. Who listened without waiting for their turn to talk. Who noticed when I fell silent and didn't rush to fill it with advice or distraction. Those were the ones I slowly moved toward. Not many, just a few, but they made a world of difference. And the others, I let them go, gently, without drama. Some noticed, some didn't, but I noticed. I felt the shift. There's no ceremony for this kind of grief. No obituary for a friendship fated by evolution rather than betrayal. But it's real, it's deep, and it deserves to be named. Still, I've come to understand that letting go doesn't make the past any less meaningful. It honors it in a strange way, because you're choosing to remember it honestly, without forcing it to keep living past its time. I still smile when I think of certain memories. A beach trip in '89, the way Frank used to dance without music, the late-night debates over whether we had one good president in our lifetime. Those are beautiful chapters, but they're not my story anymore. And I think that's one of the hardest things we learn after 60. Not everything was meant to last. Even the good things. Even the ones we thought would. And that doesn't make us failures. It just makes us human. So if you've been sitting with that same quiet ache, that distance you can't quite explain, I want you to know you're not cold-hearted. You're not selfish. You're just growing into who you are now. And not everyone will make that journey with you. And that's okay. Because the friends who do, they don't pull you back to who you were. They walk with you into who you're becoming. If you're still here, leave me a comment. Tell me about a friendship that changed, or one that still feels like home. I'll be reading, quietly, gratefully. There was a time I would have bent myself into knots just to keep a friendship alive. Rearranged my schedule, ignored the discomfort, swallowed my words to preserve the peace. I told myself that's what loyalty looked like. That's what good people did. You stayed. You adjusted. You tried harder. But now, sitting here at 80, I see it differently. Loyalty isn't about staying in places that drain you. It's about honoring the truth of what you need and trusting that real connection doesn't ask you to shrink to fit. There was a man in my life, Harold. We met in the army, bonded fast, like many young men do when the world around them feels uncertain. We wrote letters through college, stood at each other's weddings, even buried each other's parents. For decades, he was the kind of friend I could call at midnight and not feel guilty. But somewhere along the way, our paths diverged. He started talking more and listening less. Every visit became a performance. Long-winded rants about politics, complaints about his neighbors, loud opinions that left no room for questions. First, I excused it. That's just Harold, I told myself. He's always been this way, but the truth is, he hadn't always been that way. Or maybe I just changed. I no longer had the energy for battles of ego disguised as conversations. I didn't want to spend my afternoons defending my point of view or biting my tongue to avoid triggering his. I wanted stillness, warmth, dialogue, not debate. One day we sat on a park bench overlooking a lake, a spot we used to walk often when our knees didn't sound like crumpled newspapers. I told him I'd been journaling more, paying attention to dreams, even trying meditation. He scoffed, laughed loud and hard, and said, "What happened to you, man? You used to be fun." And I felt something close in me. It wasn't anger. It was mourning. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to a version of me he remembered, and worse, preferred. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep showing up for someone who only saw who I used to be. We say people change, and that's true. But sometimes people don't allow you to change. They keep you on a shelf in their mind, preserved in amber, expecting you to stay exactly as you were when they first loved you. And when you dare to evolve, when your priorities shift, when you soften, when you slow down, they call it boring, or different, or not the same. And maybe they're right, but different isn't wrong. It's just different. I don't blame Harold. We were boys when we met and we tried to stay friends as men. But he clung to who I was. I had to let go of who he no longer was. And I've learned, with some pain, that not every friendship is built to withstand the full arc of your becoming. Some are meant for a season, a decade, a chapter. They hold your hand through one fire but can't follow you into the next light. There's no shame in that, only clarity. That clarity, by the way, doesn't come all at once. It sneaks in through subtle things. You stop feeling excited to see their name on your phone. You cancel plans not because you're busy, but because the thought of pretending for another 2 hours feels heavier than staying home in silence. You notice how often you bite your tongue, how drained you feel after the laughter fades. It's not one big moment. It's a slow noticing, and that's what aging gives you, the gift of noticing, of paying attention to your internal weather instead of just the external calendar. Somewhere around 65, I stopped ignoring those signs. I started protecting my energy like it was the last warm fire of winter. I started choosing where I spent my presence, not just my time. And in doing so, I discovered something beautiful. When you let go of what no longer fits, you make room for what finally does. I used to think I needed a crowd around me to feel alive. Back in my younger days, 40s, 50s even, my calendar was full. Barbecues, reunions, Sunday lunches, game nights. There was always someone dropping by with a story, or asking for a favor, or bringing over leftovers, just because. It made me feel needed, important, like I was still in the middle of things. But something changed slowly after 60. One morning, I remember waking up to 3 missed calls and a dozen texts about a gathering that evening. And for the first time, instead of feeling excitement, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from years of being on, of showing up, keeping the peace, smiling through small talk, and stretching myself thin just to maintain old ties. I realized I didn't want noise anymore. I wanted meaning. That shift didn't make me antisocial. It made me honest. You start to notice at a certain age that many of your social ties are built on obligation, not resonance. Some friendships are like well-worn jackets, comfortable because they're familiar, not because they still fit. I had a friend, Elaine, who I'd met at a parent-teacher meeting when our kids were just starting school. We built a whole friendship around shared rides, school plays, and sleepover planning. For years, we were in each other's lives constantly. But once our kids left home, the glue thinned. Still, we tried. We'd meet for lunch once a month, sit across from each other with salads we didn't want and conversations that went nowhere. She'd talk about neighborhood gossip, or what someone wore to church last Sunday, and I'd nod politely, drifting away inside. One day, I brought up something that had been weighing on me, a dream about my late wife that had left me raw for days. She blinked, then smiled and said, You just need to get out more. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't being cruel, but the friendship had lost its depth. We were two people clinging to a structure that no longer held us. Letting go wasn't easy. I didn't send a dramatic message or make a final declaration. I just stopped forcing it. And slowly, the distance did what distance does. Settled. Here's what they don't tell you. Peace can feel empty at first. When you step back from relationships that no longer align, you find yourself with more time, more space, and for a while, more loneliness. There were afternoons when I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea and wonder if I'd made a mistake. I missed the rhythm of old routines, even if they no longer fed me. That's the trap of nostalgia. It remembers the warmth but forgets the weight. But then something beautiful began to happen. Into that space walked new people. Slowly, gently. A younger neighbor who started joining me on morning walks. A woman from the library who lent me a book that changed the way I thought about grief. A man I met at a community garden who spoke more in 5 quiet minutes than some people did in 5 decades. These weren't replacements. They were reminders that connection is still possible, even late in life. And this time, it wasn't built on history. It was built on presence. There's a freedom that comes when you stop trying to revive the past. When you make room for people who see you not as a museum of memories, but as someone still becoming. That's what I'd been craving all along. Not to be remembered, to be seen. So I stopped reaching for the familiar and started reaching for the true. And wouldn't you know it, life began to feel lighter again. The most surprising part of growing older isn't the gray hairs or the stiff knees. It's how quiet life becomes. Not empty, just quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to hear yourself again. Not the voice shaped by expectation or habit, but the one that's always been whispering beneath it all, asking, what truly matters now? That's the voice that helped me understand it was okay to release some of the friendships I once clung to with both hands. Not because they were bad, not because I was better, but because I had changed. And at this age, change isn't a phase, it's a return. A return to peace, to truth, to self. You learn that it's not the length of a friendship that makes it sacred, but the depth. Not the frequency of contact, but the quality of presence. I've got fewer people around me now. I won't deny that. But the ones who remain, oh, they are the ones who sit in silence with me and don't need to fill it. The ones who ask, how's your heart today? And wait for the real answer. There's an old man who plays chess at the park near my house. I don't even know his name. We nod at each other, sometimes sit together without saying much. One day he moved a pawn and said, most of my friends either forgot me or froze me in time. I'm not either version anymore. I just looked at him and said, same. That was enough. That was connection. When you're young, you think connection has to be constant. That friendship means texts and calls and celebrations. Now I know. It's about understanding. It's about letting each other change. And forgiving each other when we don't know how to hold what the other has become. I still love many of the people I've let go of. I smile when I think of them. I bless the years we shared. I hope they're well. But I don't chase anymore. I walk slowly and let the right ones walk beside me. And if no one's there some days, well, I've made peace with my own company. That's what senior wisdom feels like. It's not bitter. It's not loud. It's a quiet knowing that you don't have to carry everything and everyone with you to the end. Some people were only ever meant to walk you through a few chapters, and some, a rare few, will still be holding your hand when the last page turns. If you've been feeling that shift, if you've been loosening your grip on what no longer fits, I hope you give yourself grace. You're not giving up. You're growing up. Still. Always. Even now. And if you'd like to return, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere.